I hadn't even finished parking the car when my phone buzzed with a reminder that the branch manager appointment was in 30 minutes. It was a Tuesday morning in Houston, the kind where the heat sits on your shoulders like a wet coat, even at 9 a.m., and I was wearing my blazer because I had told myself this was going to be a good day. My mother had been gone for 6 weeks. I was there to open the charitable foundation account. Her final wish, written into a will she'd spent a year perfecting with her attorneys. I sat down across from the branch manager, a composed woman named Denise, who reviewed my mother's death certificate, the trust documents, the letters testamentary. Then she typed something, and her fingers stopped. "Ms. Marsh," she said, with the particular careful tone of someone who isn't sure how much you already know, "I'm seeing a flag in the system. Your marital status is currently listed as divorced." She held my gaze. The decree appears to have been finalized approximately 3 months ago. I heard the words. I processed each one individually. Then I said, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" She did. I sat there for 5 full seconds. I know because I counted them, the way you count anything when your brain is deciding whether to believe what it's hearing. Then I picked up my phone and pulled up the last text Martin had sent me that morning. "Good luck today. Proud of you, see 12 words. 7 a.m. From a man who, according to the state of Texas, had not been my husband for 3 months. My name is Claudia Marsh. I'm 37. I'm the medical director of Bright River Surgical Center, a private specialty clinic in the Texas Medical Center District of Houston. I'm a cardiac surgeon. I make decisions under pressure for a living. I can keep a perfectly steady hand while someone's heart is stopped on a table in front of me. But in that bank chair, with Denise looking at me with careful professional sympathy, my hands were shaking so badly, I had to press them flat against my knees. I built Bright River with my husband. That's the part people forget, or maybe just don't know, because Martin Collier handles the architectural and real estate side, and I handle the medicine. 11 years ago, we were a couple with 2 salaries, 1 studio apartment in Midtown, and an idea that the Texas Medical Center needed a boutique specialty surgical center with a patient experience that felt nothing like a hospital. Martin designed the building on napkins at our kitchen table. I wrote the business plan on weekends between shifts. We signed the lease together on a gray February afternoon, and I remember we drove to Whataburger afterward and split an order of honey butter chicken biscuits, because we couldn't afford to celebrate any bigger than that. That was before the staff of 211, the surgical suites, the investor relationships, the grants. That was before we had something worth taking. The attorney who handled my mother's estate was a woman named Ingrid Cho. She was meticulous, deliberate, and she did not offer comfort the way most people do. She offered clarity, which is the only thing that actually helps when the world has dropped out from under you. I called her from the bank parking garage before I even started the car. "Ingrid," I said, "the bank just told me I've been divorced for 3 months." There was a pause. "Are you somewhere private?" "I'm in my car." "Drive to my office. Don't sign anything before you get here." She had already requested a copy of the filing through her network by the time I sat down across from her desk. It came through in under 20 minutes. She spread the pages out and we read them together. The petition for dissolution of marriage. A waiver of personal appearance, meaning one party had agreed, in writing, to give up their right to appear in court. A marital settlement agreement releasing all claims to jointly held business assets. And at the bottom of each page, my signature. I recognized it immediately, the small, slightly back-slanted loop on the C, the way the H never fully closes. That was my handwriting. That was my pen. Ingrid spoke first. "Your mother's hospitalization. When exactly did it happen?" And then I remembered. Virginia Marsh, my mother, had a stroke in early October. She'd been managing her health carefully for years, but the stroke came without warning, on a Sunday afternoon, while she was in the backyard of her house in the Heights. She was in the ICU for 11 days. During those 11 days, I was at the hospital every morning before rounds and every evening after, running on the specific kind of adrenaline that belongs to daughters who are terrified of losing their mothers. Martin was supportive. He brought me food. He came to the hospital, and about a week in, he came to the surgical center one evening while I was trying to catch up on paperwork, carrying his leather portfolio. He set a stack of documents on my desk and said the words I would spend the next several months wishing I could unhear. "I need you to sign these tonight." It's the restructuring agreement for the Phase 3 expansion. The investors need the co-founder signatures before the end of the fiscal quarter. He had already tabbed the signature lines with sticky flags. 11 of them. It's mostly boilerplate, he said. You can read the full thing when things settle down with your mom. I looked up from my desk at the man I had been married to for 9 years, the man who had been standing next to me in the ICU waiting room that same morning. I said, "Is this urgent?" He said, "It is, but it's fine. It's just paperwork, see?" And I signed. Sitting in Ingrid's office, looking at my signature on a divorce decree, I thought about something my mother had said to me once over coffee, in a rare moment when she'd let her guard down about her own past. She'd said, "The most dangerous contracts are the ones you sign for people you trust." I'd thought she was talking about business. The filing had listed the mailing address for all court notices as Bright River Surgical Center's administrative office. Ingrid pointed to the line. "Who handles incoming mail at the center?" "Lori," I said. "She's been our office administrator since we opened." "And Martin has a close relationship with her?" I thought about the way Martin always stopped by Lori's desk on his way in, the birthday cards, the Christmas bonus envelopes he delivered personally. "He hired her," I said. Ingrid made a note without commenting. The chain was becoming clear even to me. The assets my mother had left were significant. $28 million in real estate holdings across Harris County, a portfolio of investment accounts, and a 12% equity stake in a regional hospital network she had spent 30 years building alongside her business partners. Her will had been drafted with extraordinary care. One clause read, "All assets bequeathed herein are the sole separate property of my daughter, Claudia Ann Marsh, and shall not be commingled with any marital estate, nor leveraged against her by any other party without her explicit written and notarized consent." My mother had known something I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. She had been building a wall around me while she was still alive to do it. I sat in Ingrid's office until after dark. When I finally left, she walked me to the elevator and said, "Do not let him know you've found out. Not yet. The way a doctor says don't scratch it, knowing you'll want to, but explaining precisely why you can't." I drove home. Martin was in the living room watching baseball, a bowl of chips on the coffee table. He looked up when I came in. "How'd the bank go?" I set my bag on the hook, took off my shoes, said, "They needed more paperwork. I'll go back Thursday." He nodded and looked back at the game. I went to the bathroom, ran the shower until the room filled with steam, and cried for exactly 7 minutes. Then I washed my face and went to the kitchen to make tea, because I had patients scheduled the next morning, and because some things you can only fall apart over once you've figured out how to put yourself back together at the same time. The next day I called Knox. He was an old contact from residency, the kind who had pivoted from medicine to private investigations after a run of hospital politics that left him deeply cynical about institutions, but very good at reading people. I met him at a coffee shop in Montrose and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. On it was Martin's name, his cell number, and the address of an apartment building in Midtown he'd mentioned casually once. Something about a project near Main Street he was consulting on. I hadn't thought twice about it at the time. Knox looked at the paper. "How much do you already know?" "Not enough," I said. He called me back in 4 days. The apartment was on the 14th floor of a building called the Monroe, registered to a woman named Tamara Briggs. I knew the name the moment I heard it, and I sat very still in my car, with Knox on speakerphone, while the Houston traffic moved past the windows. Tamara had come to Houston from rural Mississippi 6 years ago. She'd been working as a phlebotomy technician at a county clinic, barely covering rent, drowning in the medical debt left over from her mother's cancer treatments. A colleague had mentioned her situation to me. I had offered to help her enroll in a surgical tech certification program at Houston Community College. I paid the tuition. I wrote the letter of recommendation that got her into a teaching hospital for her clinical hours. When she graduated, I hired her at Bright River. I thought I had given someone a foothold. I thought that was a good thing. Knox told me she had a son. His name was Jasper. He was 22 months old. Martin's car was in the parking garage of the Monroe, an average of 4 nights a week. I don't know how long I sat in that car after Knox finished talking. Long enough that the parking meter expired and I got a ticket. I didn't notice it until I found it under the wiper blade the next morning. That evening I went home and made dinner. Martin came in around 7, hung up his jacket, and said, "The kitchen smelled good." He ate the entire plate. He asked about my day. I said it was long. He said he understood. We watched half of a nature documentary. Then he went to bed. I sat on the couch in the dark for a long time, looking at the wedding photo on the mantel. It had been taken in the backyard of my mother's house in the Heights. Martin was laughing at I'd whispered to him just before the shutter clicked. I remembered exactly what I'd said. I didn't touch the glass. 2 weeks later, Martin brought them home. He texted me on a Thursday afternoon. "Minor emergency at the Monroe. Tamara's AC unit went out. She and Jasper are going to stay with us a few days. She doesn't have family in Houston." Then, 11 minutes later before I'd responded, "It's just temporary. Hope that's okay." I came home that evening to a child-sized rolling suitcase beside the front door, a pair of tiny sneakers in the entry hall, and Jasper asleep on my living room couch, arms wrapped around a stuffed elephant. Tamara was in my kitchen, using my cast iron skillet, the one my mother had given me the Christmas before she got sick, to make quesadillas. She looked up when I came in and gave me a smile that could only be described as careful. "Claudia, I hope this is okay. We really didn't have anywhere else to go." Martin was near the kitchen island with the specific expression of a man who expects a scene and has already decided in advance he'll blame the other person for it. I said, "It's fine. I set my purse on the hook. I have notes to finish." Jasper stirred on the couch. He sat up and blinked at me with the frank, undefended curiosity that belongs specifically to toddlers and people who have nothing to hide. "Hi," he said. He held out the stuffed elephant. The button eyes was hanging by a thread. "He's sick. Can you fix him?" I sat down next to him. "I think I can." Jasper watched me with complete seriousness, while I found a safety pin in the hall drawer and secured the button. When I finished, he said, "Are you a doctor?" "I am." He nodded, as if that confirmed something he'd already suspected, then tucked the elephant under his arm and went back to his cartoons. I walked to my home office and called Ingrid. The financial situation at Bright River was worse than I had let myself imagine. Felix Adesanya had been our senior financial analyst for 3 years. What most people at the center didn't know was that Felix had grown up in Third Ward, the son of Nigerian immigrants, and that his undergraduate tuition had been paid through a scholarship fund my mother had quietly administered for over a decade. She had never mentioned it to me. Felix had told me himself, on his first week at Bright River, pulling me aside during a staff onboarding session to say, "Your mother changed my life. I want you to know I take this work seriously because of that." I'd thanked him and hadn't thought much more of it. Until now. I called him on a Friday morning and told him I needed a quiet internal audit, expenditures tied to facilities management, equipment procurement, and consulting contracts over the past 3 years. I told him to keep it between us. He didn't ask why. He said, "I'll have preliminary findings by Wednesday." Felix came to my office that Wednesday, closed the door behind him, and set a manila folder on my desk. $340,000. It had moved through 3 vendor accounts, a property management company, an equipment leasing LLC, and a consulting firm with no website and a registered address at a UPS store in Katy. The principal of that LLC was listed as Rhonda Briggs, Tamara's mother. Felix traced the money carefully, methodically. Funds from Bright River's operations budget, routed through vendors Martin had personally approved, arriving in pieces at a personal account connected to the Monroe. Some of it had gone to Jasper's private daycare, a place in the Heights that charged $2,200 a month. Some of it had paid for a car, a white Lexus currently registered to Tamara. I looked at the number on the page and thought about every grant application I'd spent weekends writing, every insurance negotiation I'd sat through, every late-paying client account I'd restructured to keep payroll stable. "Is it airtight?" I asked. "Airtight enough to matter," Felix said. "Give me 2 more weeks to trace the remainder." I gave him the 2 weeks. Martin made his move on a Tuesday. He came to my office with a folder, sat across from my desk, with the expression of a man exercising strategic patience, and told me he needed my signature on a co-owner authorization form, an administrative update to his operational authority over the facilities and real estate portfolio tied to Bright River. I opened the folder. The first 2 pages were what he'd described. Page 4 was a transfer of my 18% ownership stake in the center to a holding company called Meridian Properties, LLC, for the sum of $1. I looked up at him. Martin leaned back. Claudia, I know the timing isn't ideal, but legally we're already divorced. The center's ownership structure needs to reflect that. He said it the way you explain something obvious to someone who is being slow about it. You'll still have your salary. Your role here doesn't change. This is just paperwork. I heard my mother's voice very clearly in that moment. Give me a few days to review it, I said. Martin's expression held steady, but something shifted behind his eyes. I need this before end of month. The lenders are waiting. Then I'll have it to you before end of month, I said. He stood. He said, don't make this harder than it has to be. I said, I'm not making anything. After he left, I sat alone and listened to the center around me. A nurse's sneakers on the hallway floor, the soft tone of a patient monitor, someone laughing at the reception desk. 211 people worked here. A lot of them had been with us since the beginning, when we were still learning how to negotiate supply contracts, and the break room microwave broke every other month. I reached into my blazer pocket, where the voice memo app on my secondary phone had been running since Martin sat down. Ingrid, when I called her, said, he just confessed to using the divorce as leverage to extort an asset transfer. Combined with what Felix found, we're past civil territory. She paused. We file with the DA's office Wednesday morning. Martin's mother, Sylvia Collier, had never been especially warm to me, but she'd been correct. Present at holidays, reliable in photographs, willing to acknowledge my existence in the family frame. She had strong opinions about the proper order of things, which was that Martin's comfort and continuity should come first. I had not fully understood that about her until the Collier family Labor Day cookout in Katy, when I arrived to find that Sylvia had given Tamara the folding chair beside the main table, the spot that had been mine at every gathering for 9 years, and sent me to the overflow table near the driveway, next to Martin's teenage nephews. Chester, Martin's father, caught my eye from across the lawn. He gave me a look that contained an entire apology he didn't have the vocabulary to speak. I had always liked Chester. He was a man who knew the difference between what was right and what was happening, and suffered quietly because he couldn't close the distance between them. Sylvia carried Jasper on her hip for the entire afternoon and introduced him to every relative who stopped by. She used the word legacy. She said, loud enough for the whole yard to carry it, that some women put career so far ahead of family that they missed what actually mattered. And wasn't it something, the way things had a way of working themselves out? I ate potato salad and said nothing. I was not defeated, I was measuring. The Bright River board meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of October. Ingrid had advised me to file the documentation with the Harris County District Attorney's Office the Wednesday morning before. I did. Knox was in the lobby at 8 a.m. Felix had printed 3 complete audit reports, one for the board, one for the DA's office, one sealed in an envelope addressed to Ingrid as a backup. I had met with the 4 independent board members the previous Friday, privately, one by one, and shown each of them the preliminary findings without telling the others. By Thursday morning, all 4 had retained their own counsel. Martin walked into the boardroom at 9, carrying his laptop, expecting a quarterly review. He found a room that had rearranged itself around a different story than the one he thought he was telling. I presented the audit findings first. $340,000, the vendor accounts, the LLC registered to Tamara's mother, the Lexus, the daycare. I put it on screen using the same projector we used for investor presentations, and I spoke in the same tone I use for surgical briefings. Clear, steady, no excess. Martin sat at the other end of the table, with an expression I had never seen on his face before, not quite guilt. Something closer to the shock of a person who had spent a long time believing he was the smartest one in the room. He said, "This is fabricated." He opened his laptop. "I can show you the original records." The board chair said, "Martin, the DA's office already has a copy." The room went very quiet. Martin's hands stopped moving over the keyboard. He looked down the table at me. I said, "The divorce you had me sign without my knowledge, the embezzlement, the equity transfer attempt last Tuesday, all of it is documented." I paused, Dad. "You should call your attorney." 2 Harris County Sheriff's deputies were waiting in the main lobby. I watched from the second-floor window as Martin walked out between them, his laptop bag still over his shoulder, and got into the back of a patrol car. Lori was escorted out separately to speak with investigators. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. I didn't feel triumph watching her. I felt tired, mostly, and grateful for Felix, and for Ingrid, and for Chester, who had called me the night before to say only, "I know this comes too late, but I'm sorry, Claudia, for all of it." In the months that followed, Martin was indicted on wire fraud, embezzlement, and extortion charges. The secret divorce proceedings were challenged on grounds of fraud and subsequently voided by the Harris County Family Court. Lori entered a cooperation agreement with investigators. The 3 vendor accounts were dissolved and partial restitution was ordered. Felix became Bright River's chief financial officer. He keeps 3 backup drives, encrypted, in separate locations. I consider that a reasonable response to lived experience. Ingrid restructured the center's operating agreement so that no single signatory can authorize a financial transfer above a certain threshold without 2 additional approvals. Martin had built his access on the assumption that my trust was permanent. We fixed the structure, not just the personnel. I used a portion of my mother's estate to fund the foundation she had asked for, a scholarship program for first-generation students entering healthcare fields across Houston. It is called the Virginia Marsh Foundation. On the application, in the section where students describe what a mentor has meant to them, I still sometimes read an answer that makes me sit in my office for a long time without moving. My mother used to say that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was confuse kindness with naivety, and the second most dangerous was confuse love with security. She said those 2 confusions together could cost a woman everything she'd built. I thought I understood her. I thought I was careful. It turned out I was careful in the operating room and nowhere else that mattered. Standing at my office window on a November morning, looking out at the Texas Medical Center through the glass, I thought about that bank chair in September and Denise's quiet, careful voice. 5 seconds of silence before I asked her to repeat herself. I used to think those 5 seconds were the moment I lost everything. I know, now they were the moment I stopped losing and started paying attention. A woman can be competent and still be fooled. She can be generous and still be taken. She can love someone and still need to read every page before she signs her name. Those things are not contradictions. They are just the full cost of being a person in the world. And the ones who survive it are the ones who decide, at the bottom, that the way out is through.